There's a proverb that goes something like this: well fed people have many problems, hungry people have only one. I wish that proverb were true in Yemen, but the fact is, the starving people there have many problems. It isn't just famine, it's also the Saudi Arabian led bombing campaign, supported by the United States, that has made Yemen one of the most dangerous places on earth, and the naval blockade, again supported by the United States, that has led to widespread starvation. The new documentary, Hunger Ward, profiles two young children who don't understand or care about any of that. One of them is a 6-year-old girl named Abir who weighs 15 pounds. I'm not great with enunciation, so let me be clear. That's 15 pounds. There are newborns who weigh 10 pounds. She's 6 years old. The United Nations World Food Program says that 16 million people in Yemen are food insecure, and more than 1 million pregnant or breastfeeding women, and more than 2 million young children suffer from acute malnutrition. Our guest today, Sky Fitzgerald, is the director of Hunger Ward, which is nominated for an Oscar for Best Documentary Short Subject, and portrays doctors at two different hunger wards who are trying to save the children of Yemen from hideous malnutrition. You can watch this excellent film on Paramount Plus or for free on Pluto TV, and if you do, I can almost promise that you're going to want to do something about what you're going to see. And you can, as Sky Fitzgerald explains, you can give directly to the hunger wards in the film at hungerward.org. Your money will go very far toward helping some of the children who are most desperately in need of help in the entire world. I'm Tim Malloy from Movie Maker, and here's my talk with Sky Fitzgerald, director of Hunger Ward. Well, Sky Fitzgerald, welcome to Movie Maker, and thank you for making Hunger Ward an incredible movie and a very hard movie to watch, if I'm being honest. Can you set up for people who aren't familiar with the film or with the situation in Yemen what this is about?
Yeah, in a nutshell, it's really a film about war, but sort of obliquely. It's about the effects of the human-caused famine in Yemen, which is being caused by the current conflict, mostly between the Saudi coalition, which the U.S. is a part of, and then the Houthi-held rebel North. And the geopolitics of it are that there's a blockade over the country that is preventing food and medicine from entering properly, as well as diesel fuel to transport foodstuffs, which has resulted in a famine in the country. There's just no other way of saying it. And
Yeah.
so starvation is really being used as a tool of war, despite that being explicitly prohibited by the UN. So it's really quite a horrible human-caused famine that most of the world simply doesn't know about.
Yeah, I had the thought watching this that everything else on Twitter, everything else, popping up on streaming and everything else that competes for our attention is just distracting us from this one of the worst places in the world in terms of human suffering. And I felt really embarrassed not to know more about this, not to be like a total virtue signaler or something, but I really felt stupid that I didn't know more about this and hadn't done anything about it.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone should feel, like ignorant for not knowing about it, because the fact is that, there's an active attempt to prevent us in the West from learning about this conflict and our own complicity in the conflict. And one of the ways that that's done is the the coalition which blocks food and diesel from entering the country also prevents journalists and filmmakers from getting in to tell this story, but also local journalists and filmmakers are prevented from getting these stories out, and they're actively disappeared, they're actively jailed, and they're actively killed, frankly, because Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis don't want us here to know that starvation is being used as a tool in conflict, because it is such a horrific idea, right? And you said that you were sort of bothered by this, Tim, and I think that's okay too. What's that old quote? Art disturbs and science reassures, I think is how it goes.
Mm.
I'm a believer in that. I think part of our role as artists and as filmmakers is to raise the flag and say, look at this. We ought to be looking at this. And is it hard to look at? Yeah, maybe it is hard to look at, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah. I got mad at the situation watching it, and at some point I think I was mad at you. I had that silly thought of, why doesn't this person put down the camera and feed this kid? And
Yeah.
then obviously we all have that at watching every documentary, and it's just because it's like the easiest emotion to access. And then when I thought about it for 2 seconds, it was like, well, I'm saying this from a comfortable place. While they went there, they've started this website, which I hope you'll give the URL for, where people can help. They're drawing attention to this. And by photographing this, they're actually doing much more good than they could do by helping any individual child. I mean, what are there? Hundreds, thousands
Yeah.
of children?
Yeah. There's been over 400,000 people who have died of starvation since the start of the war, which is just, that's mind-boggling, right? That's just such a huge number. And I think that's one of the dangers in this geopolitical crisis, and any geopolitical crisis, is the concept of compassion fatigue, right? It's a real thing.
Right.
And I was very intentional about really not trying to tell a broad spectrum story of the conflict and fully contextualize it, because I think it falls into that sand trap, right? Of people are going to be numbed by the numbers. And I felt like the way through that as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, was to focus on the individual, to focus on the individual efforts of two healthcare workers who had dedicated their lives to saving this child, Abir, and this child, Omema. To me, there's a power in that singularity. There's a power in showing you this child's struggle to survive because of the war. So that was our approach, was going narrow, and it was compounded by the realities within which we had to operate, which were, we had limited amount of time in the country, and it's a conflict zone. And so we had to really do everything we could to make sure that we collaborated in a way that protected those we were working with, as well as our own team.
I wanted to ask how you found, I hope I'm saying her name right, Omema and Abir. Abir in particular, it just, I have a son who's weighs about 23 pounds. He's 10 months old. And she is 6 years old and weighs 15 pounds. Which is so beyond heartbreaking. I don't even know where to begin. How did you find them, and how did you decide to focus on them?
So we had longstanding relationships with the two healthcare workers, with Makia in the north, and then Dr. Aida in the south. And because we had that trust already built up long before we arrived, the secondary part of this, of the building of the trust with the families and the children, really was one of our primary tasks when we arrived. So we had long discussions with all the families who had kids in the clinics. We talked with the kids, of course. And as soon as Makia introduced us to Abir, and I saw this child who was like any other child in the world, any other 6-year-old, and yet she was so stricken with the chronic effects of starvation that she couldn't even smile. Yeah. That just gutted me. And so we just started following her once the grandmother and the mother said they wanted us to try to tell her story. And I was so moved in a profound way by this girl who was trying to smile. She was trying to thrive despite all the odds. And, we started to pull for her. We really wanted her to physically turn around and to thrive again as a young child and smile and play with a balloon like any other 6-year-old wants to, right? Yeah. And to me, her story is one of the hopeful ones.
Yeah.
because in fact, we stay in contact with as many of the families as we can, and of course the healthcare providers, and she's thriving now. So we get photos from the north of Yemen on a relatively regular basis, and Abir's doing great actually, and she's thriving and she's gaining healthy weight. So there is hope, right? There is the opportunity for individual success, if if people commit to it.
And Omaima, is she also doing well?
She is. She's another hopeful story. We actually tracked her back to her home village on the west coast of Yemen, and was actually there when she saw her. I think it's 10 siblings and mother and father for the first time, and it was this incredibly joyous scene where only a month before she had been. It was hard for her even to stand up by herself, because as you noted, she's weighed 24 pounds as a 10-year-old. And by the time she made it back to her village and she'd been properly diagnosed and she was on a different diet and she had some medicine, she was literally dancing with her siblings when she arrived. So, it is possible to turn this around because it's a human caused famine, right? And it just needs a certain level of care and resource to do it. And that was the sort of the hope we were looking for throughout the filming of this, is where is the hope within this, quite difficult context of war and conflict?
A lot of times when you hear about conflicts like this, you think about maybe giving some money and you worry, well, this will just be taken by a corrupt government or something like that, and it will never find its way to the right people. That's not really true in this situation, right? I mean, the United States is part of this in that we're supporting Saudi Arabia, which is leading the coalition, which is allowing or causing the starvation. How far do American dollars go? I mean, if you give $100 to this, what does it do, and how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's a great question from a practical sense, because we can't intervene. This is one of those films that's it's about something that's happening and unfolding right now, right? Like Omaima is undergoing treatment right now, and those in her cohort of this generation being affected by the war are going through the same thing right now in the two clinics we show in the film. And so we wanted to make sure that the film could become a vehicle for intervention with civil society. And so we've done that in two ways. One, we've partnered with the Friends Committee for National Legislation in DC, which is sort of the governmental intervention piece of it, to try to convince our own government to withdraw support for the Saudi blockade, which can have a real and meaningful impact once successfully done. And the second piece is the donations to the two clinics. So we've built this paradigm through a nonprofit partner where people can donate on our website, which is hungerward.org. And that money goes directly through our 501c3 partner to the two clinics shown in the film. And $50 a month will support one of these children for a full month, for all of the care, the blood tests they need, because sometimes they need blood tests to help diagnose sort of their blood chemistry and what medicine they can take and what they can't, as well as a specialty diet that then the clinics provide for the children to ensure they go through the different phases of sort of thriving again, because you can't just give them any food stuff depending on how deep in on severe acute malnutrition they are. You have to phase in different foodstuffs. So $50 a month actually pays for everything. And yeah, exactly. That it's quite astounding. It goes a long ways.
And I mean, just to be clear, this isn't like a charity that has incredible overhead and like the movie gets some of it and Hollywood gets their share. I mean, this is $50. It goes directly to helping it.
It goes directly to Dr. Al-Sadiq, who you see in the film in the South, and it goes directly to Nurse Makia in the North. Full stop. I mean, we have to go through a financial mechanism, obviously, and there's but other than that, it goes directly into their pockets and they use it at those two facilities.
Yeah, I'm gonna break my journalistic neutrality and do that when we're done talking, because you can't see the movie and not want to do something. And I know a lot of people who've seen the film feel exactly that way. It's kind of impossible not to. How did you first get this access? I mean, as hard as it was to get into Yemen.
Ooh, this is your question goes to the heart of why you don't see films coming out of Yemen, right? I mentioned that the coalition really doesn't want these stories to get out. And so one of the hardest tasks in this entire project was getting access, right? And we also attempted to build out sort of work with local collaborators, local filmmakers on the ground. But as I mentioned earlier, it's very, very difficult for local filmmakers and journalists to get the story out as well, because they are killed and detained and tortured if they do these kinds of stories. So for us, we felt like we had the cover at least of foreign visas, which took us almost 9 months to get through the embassy in DC, because there's a standing embargo against visas to journalists and filmmakers to get in. So we had to work a lot of political angles very carefully for a very long time before we were given access. And then it was limited. We only had 30 days. And if we overstayed it, we would have probably been thrown in jail or kicked out.
I mean, you're an American filmmaker in Oregon. I tried to get a visa to China, and I think of what a hassle that was. And China is nowhere near as difficult a country to get into as Yemen. Can you talk about specifically what questions you had to answer, what you had to say? Did you have to lie? I mean, how did you do this?
No, we didn't have to lie. My approach on some of those delicate conversations was to be honest and to be very general. Right. And so I tried to keep it at a 30,000-foot view. And basically what we said with everybody who we needed to sort of pitch it to gain access was, listen, we're doing a film that takes a humanitarian view on the conflict in Yemen and really looks at the effects of the conflict on civilians. Yeah. That's it. That's what we're doing. Sometimes I would mention that it doesn't have an overtly explicit political point of view, right? But we may contextualize some of it with, obviously, the context of the war, which, as you know, we do only at the end of the film, really, as people start to want to know why and how can this happen. And that was very intentional as well, because I'm a big believer that that cinema is best suited to show people, right? Mm-hmm. And to help people feel something. And if we can get them to the end of the film and they've got 50 questions they want to answer all of a sudden, that will engage the psyche and the mind, right? So I was trying to pose questions as much as I could so that people would engage once they finish the film.
Can you talk about the intrusion of the camera and how you avoided the intrusion of the camera? I mean, you capture people in the most horrible moments, people whose children have just died, doctors who are having breakdowns. This sounds like I'm making it sound like this film is agony to watch, and it's not. I mean, it's so well done, and you don't have a heavy hand. Like you do a good job of telling the story in a very, I don't want to say dispassionate, but a not leading way that lets us draw our own conclusions. But the camera gets to a lot of things that I'm surprised you were able to get. Did you have to have conversations with everyone beforehand who you filmed? Did you have conversations with them afterwards? How did you get this kind of access and avoid having people just look at the camera and say, get out of here?
That whole tension between access and honoring the access on a moment-to-moment basis was very real and very delicate and very nuanced. And it was something that we had to be really sensitive to every moment that we were in these clinics. I'm a big believer in directness and of not flinching as a filmmaker from a moment, even if it's a hard moment. And also trying to convey that to viewers by not looking away with the camera, but also not cutting away. In the classic best usage of verite, I think, there's a power in the unfolding of the moment, right? If you stay with it and you're patient, but also don't cut away from that moment, which is exactly why we have, quite a few shots in this film that are nearly a minute and a half long without an edit, where you just you track a grieving mom as she walks down the hallway and sort of breaks down as she understands what has happened to her daughter. Or we track a healthcare worker who goes through her own grieving process, right? To me, that's a much by placing the viewer there and not cutting away, you experience it in a more visceral way, in a different way, because you're there in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
We were only allowed to do that because of relationships, right? Because we stuck with these families and because we had long conversations with them before these events happened about why we were there, why we hoped to collaborate with them, and if they wanted to collaborate with us. So it was a conversation, right, that was dynamic and ongoing and never ended. And the way that we executed it was very, very simple. We were simply two people, two cameras, long lenses, right, with no boom pole, so that we could sort of tuck ourselves into the scenes and move as little as possible to try to capture what was happening, to be as least obtrusive as possible. So in that way, as being a really small team paradigm, we were accepted relatively quickly because we weren't constantly intruding on the scene. We never asked anyone to do anything. We simply observed and then sort of caught what we could without trying to intrude on the scene.
And all your efforts are meaningless if you don't pull it off from a filmmaking standpoint. I don't understand how you were able to get the sound that you got without a boom. I mean, how did that?
It's amazing what you can do with a couple of lavalier mics, right, and shotgun mics. So we would put lav mics on the nurses and doctors who we had these long-standing relationships with, but we never put them on the families at all. So all that sound was captured either from a lav mic or from a shotgun on a camera. So we had 4 audio sources, right, at any given time, typically. But you are pointing out one of the practical challenges we had in this project, which is, my sound mixer always hates me when I come back from these projects because there is no boom, there is no perfect audio, and it's a compromise that I make, Tim, that I'm happy to make because I'm just such a profound believer that cinema is and ought to be a visually driven medium. It's just how I speak, it's how I use it, and I think most often people will forgive you if the audio is not perfect. If it's strong visually, right? I think the cinema is a world and a language and a syntax of images, and that's how I try to tell these stories.
Well, I mean, not to blow smoke, but this is a case where it actually can make a difference. I mean, getting the shot or not getting the shot, again, I don't want to be over dramatic, but could be a matter of life and death. Like it could be the decision of whether someone is going to contribute to this or help with this, or whether someone in Congress is going to see your film and learn about something they didn't know about. So, yeah. I mean, I'm not just being like a tech head who can't see the forest for the trees here. I mean, it really was important that you were able to get the shots that you got. The other thing that really surprised me is we're all sort of sick of drone shots. And I thought your drone shot at the end, paired with the facts that you're giving in text, was incredible because you have the camera moving, and as it's rotating, the words are staying in place, and you have this dizzying feeling. And just sort of that sense of being overwhelmed that I think really reflects the ideas of the film a lot. Was that intentional?
I'm glad you bring that up because that's something I was very intentional about, and it came out of sort of this notion that you're at least in nonfiction film for me, I'm constantly having to sort of evolve my approach in the field and respond to what I discover. And that last drone shot came directly out of this theme, which I experienced over and over again in the field of filming with all these families and these doctors. And it was this theme of feeling unsettled and displaced and uncomfortable, because these clinics are very dynamic and people are passing all the time. And, there's mortars dropping outside sometimes and small arms fire. And I wanted to find a way to reflect that sense of disorientation and almost vertigo, right? Mm-hmm. That some of these people feel at the loss of a child or this war pounding outside. And I thought, how could I do that visually again to reflect those themes? And I wanted to experiment with that a little bit as a filmmaker. And so, as you may remember, it's the same point of view as the opening shot of the film, where we descend with a static non-rotational frame as an opening, right? Just to introduce the viewer to the facility. And then on the end, it's really the same frame. And then we slowly like to rotate, as you notice. And I was intentionally trying to create this sense of vertigo by placing the subtitles in the center of the frame, which sort of anchor the frame. And there is a sense, once that frame comes to rest, finally, it's a visual aberration where it seems the frame, you start to get a little bit dizzy as it comes to rest. So I'm still hoping to see that on a big screen, which I haven't, because I think it's really going to work quite well on a 30 or 50-foot screen.
I thought it was amazing. I thought it was really effective. The other sort of recent cliche you didn't do was inject yourself into the film. Was there a point that you felt in danger? Was there a point that you felt that the production was in danger?
Yeah, there was, what you don't see, you don't hear about in this film is the incredible challenge of doing the film. Sure. But this film isn't and shouldn't be about me, the filmmaker, or the other filmmakers involved. It should be about these children and I see them as heroic healthcare workers saving children's lives on a daily basis. I mean, our trials and travails were nothing compared to what they face on a daily basis. And so I just felt like I didn't want to be a narcissistic filmmaker who sort of made it about us. I wanted to showcase the daily work of these heroic healthcare workers. So yes, were we detained once? Yes, we were. Did we have to fight hard to sort of be released from that detainment to continue our work? Yes. Did we have to transfer footage, using generators that often failed, and then we'd stay up all night trying to work our Frankenstein-like, apparatus of drives and computers to transfer footage? Even those fundamentals were very difficult, but they didn't really matter. And so that's why I really, I try not to throw too much focus on the back end of the film so much.
I think that's a great place to end. Just so I don't get this wrong, who detained you and what was that like?
So each area in the south of the country sort of controlled each district by different militias and warlords. So you have to travel very, very carefully. And so there's a major gate leading into the city of Aden in the south. And the warlord who controlled that gate simply detained us. We think it was the early part of a mechanism for a kidnap and ransom attempt. But fortunately, we had dinner a couple times with a very high-ranking member of the local Southern Transitional Council, which is another armed militia group in the area. And he'd become sort of a colleague of ours, and he called the warlord on our behalf, and he released us.
Okay, I think I do have to use that.
You do what you need to do.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for this film. Can you say where people can find it and also where people can donate if they want to?
Yeah. So Hunger Ward just launched on Paramount Plus on Friday, and it's also on Pluto TV. So those are the two primary streaming platforms. And then hungerward.org is our website, and you can find all things engagement there in terms of how to engage your own senator and representative, as well as to donate directly to the two clinics showcased in the film.
That was Sky Fitzgerald, director of Hunger Ward, and that URL again is hungerward.org, hunger, WARD.org. Thanks, and see you very soon.